Olá, bem-vindas e bem-vindos. Eu sou a Mariana Almeida e este é o McKinsey Talks, direto do estúdio da McKinsey em São Paulo. Este é o segundo episódio da série Inteligência Artificial nos Negócios. E o tema de hoje é como o uso de dados trará resultados e definirá as empresas em 2025. São apenas 3 anos que nos separam dessa data. Mas até lá, fluxos de trabalho inteligentes e interações perfeitas entre humanos e máquinas provavelmente serão tão comuns quanto o balanço de uma empresa. E grande parte das equipes usará dados para otimizar etapas do trabalho. Um guia produzido pela McKinsey mostra 7 características que vão definir esta nova empresa movida por dados e oferece recursos para ajudar os executivos a implementá-las nas empresas. Nossa conversa será em inglês, porque para falar sobre isso, estamos conectados com Kayvaun Rowshankish, sócio da McKinsey em Nova York e um dos autores do estudo. Welcome, Kayvaun. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Também está conectado conosco o Elias Goraieb, Sócio Sênior da McKinsey em São Paulo, líder da prática de risco e co-líder da prática de analítica avançada na América Latina. Olá, Elias, seja muito bem-vindo.
É um prazer estar aqui.
O prazer é todo nosso. Let's get started. So, Kayvaun, can you tell us a bit about this guide and how it came about?
Absolutely, happy to. So we have been observing over recent years a massive increase in the pace of innovation around data, as well as recognition of the importance of data amongst board and C-suite members of big and smaller institutions. We've also seen these institutions embrace data in a meaningful way to compete. And as we watch this race pick up, our sense is that if firms don't start to participate and join the race, over the next few years, they'll be left behind and become irrelevant as their industries and competing institutions redefine themselves. So we thought it would be helpful to frame 7 characteristics that firms will exhibit by 2025 as a guide to help institutions navigate this race. And it's not to say that these are not seen in institutions today. Many of these characteristics are being embraced by institutions, but not pervasively. And we think by 2025, we will see many of the leading institutions adopt these 7 characteristics in very deep and meaningful ways, holistically.
And if I may, it's an important conversation to have today with business leaders, because in the end of the day, it takes practice to capture the real benefits of data and like any other important capability that we have in the organization. As a clear example, what the research shows is that companies that are already seeing 20% of their EBIT coming from AI are far more likely to engage in data practices that we describe in the research than those that don't. So I would encourage anyone interested in exploring further to read the full guide, so you have space and time to explore further each characteristic in depth.
Great, very interesting. And Elias, to be very practical here, what is the average return on investment, ROI, in a data-driven company? Has it been improving over time?
Well, first, one could argue that in some industry, it's already a matter of survival, such as in the financial industry. But in the end of the day, organizations need to embed data in everything. And there is a cost to that, the investment that we make to do so. But the results that we see are worth the investment in the process. It obviously varies from company to company, but we have seen an increase in the number of companies seeing a direct bottom line impact attributable to AI in a period as short as 1 year, so very short period of time. In one of our major studies, the share of respondents reporting that at least 5 percentage points of EBIT coming from AI-related business increased to 27% in 2021, up from 22% in 2020. So 20% increase in just 1 year. As I mentioned earlier, some companies report seeing upwards of 20% of EBIT coming from AI. So the returns can be significant and are clearly growing as technology evolves, and the companies learn how to apply those from concept to implementation. In one specific example, an energy company that we worked with used AI to revamp customer value management, including which customers to target, what to offer, which channels to use. And the results actually led to a record growth in just a few months. More than 20% increase in customer retention, which is really hard to get in this industry, and 12% increase in customer profit, which is quite a huge impact if you consider the period of time for that specific company. So it's important to mention that sometimes we get this question, right? That there are different technologies and the complexity of problems are different. And it's important to match those and use the appropriate technology depending on the complexity of the problem that we are trying to solve. For instance, there are many decisions that could be simply solved with cheap automation technologies instead of more sophisticated bespoke decision engines. And using deliberately the full menu of alternatives is key to both maximize ROI and learn along the way.
Well, these numbers are impressive, really. Thank you very much, Elias. Kayvaun, over to you. You mentioned that there are 7 characteristics of a data-driven company. Could you start by explaining some of them and why they matter, please?
Certainly, and obviously we don't have time to talk about all 7. So I would suggest maybe we focus on 3 of them. And I'd encourage everybody to go ahead and read the report offline to get the full picture. The 3 I was going to suggest that we spend some time on are the first one, which is around embedding AI and data in everything that's relevant, I would say. Secondly, data products and the related operating model that surrounds data products. And then thirdly, applying AI and automation to data management. So maybe we get started with the first one. And this is really about applying AI and data in every relevant interaction and decision and process throughout an organization. If you look at institutions today, what you'll find is that they have applied AI and data in isolated use cases, right? They've looked often for most immediate, attainable, highest impact, and they've built some use cases to solve those problems and enabled it with data. What we're going to see over the next few years is all employees being sufficiently literate that they can look at every problem that they face and apply AI and data solutions to solve those problems. You'll see customers that are interacting with the institution and each other and employees doing it largely driven off of AI and data. And the C-suite and managers within institutions are going to be guiding the firm, guiding their teams, and designing solutions that are largely AI and data driven. The things I would say that are worth recognizing are 2 critical enablers in this space. The first is one I mentioned, which is around literacy, data and AI literacy. I think we're going to see a massive increase in the awareness and the competence of employees across these organizations to be able to understand where it's valuable to apply AI and data. And secondly, I think we'll see a growth in the availability of tools that make it easy to apply AI and data along the lines of self-serve, autonomous AI, and various other sort of plug-and-play tools that put AI and data at the hands of employees.
And it's interesting because when a CXO wants an answer to a complex problem today, it might take teams a couple of months to come back to them with something that is helpful. An automated data-driven AI system can help answer a strategic question much more quickly than this, in a matter of days or even hours. Obviously, I'm not saying that AI will replace everything, but technology enablement clearly improves decision-making, both in quality and speed.
I would just also wrap up on this characteristic by reinforcing the point that this doesn't mean that AI and data will replace everything. I use the word relevant quite purposefully. I think that you will see a lot of activities today continue. A lot of the relationship-driven businesses will continue to be relationship-driven businesses, but they will be AI and data enabled. Employees will still continue to drive a lot of the more human-centric activities within the organization. But at the same time, I think what we'll see is AI and data being much more pervasive. And I think it will take hold in quite interesting ways because, what we'll have the opportunity to do is not just simply replace existing activities with AI and data and automation. We will actually be able to remove some of the activities that are just not, enjoyable to customers and employees, and start to really innovate how the business is run in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kayvaun. Now let's head to 2025 again. What is another characteristic of this data-driven company?
Sure. The next one we were going to spend some time on is around data products. And, as you talk about data products, you can't talk about them in isolation. You also have to talk about modernization of the architecture in which they sit and the more data product-centric operating model that wraps around them. But if you look at where we are today and the journey that we've been on more recently, data has generally been scattered around organizations. It's often redundant, inconsistent, quality issues, and there's a range of regulatory and compliance and cost issues with managing the data in that way. You add to that the systems, the legacy systems are generally inflexible, and there's been a lot of struggle to apply an effective accountability model, and it's understandable that that's been the case because of the data sprawl. In 2025, what we would expect to see is institutions fully embracing data as a firm asset to the extent that in many instances it could be treated as a commercializable asset, the same as any other product the institution manages. This will bring about a greater focus on quality, reuse, adoption, and ROI, and obviously resiliency and security associated with the data. It'll also require more modernized architecture to store the data in. And we're seeing a variety of innovations that allow you to leave data where it is so that you can avoid copying it into large environments and creating redundancy. And you're seeing a lot of innovation in how architectures and the use of cloud enable flexibility and security as we go forward. We're also going to be able to see then a more product-centric approach to the operating model, where you will have product owners for a particular domain of data or a data product. And those data owners will be supported by data engineers and applying agile techniques front to back to make that data readily available for solving various business problems. We're already seeing the early stages of this. We have been working, for example, with a telecoms firm that has already delivered over $500 million of impact through a very small number of data products that they've used to digitize how they look at their network and how they manage their network. We've seen mid-sized banks generate over $300 million of impact through various different data products, but especially around the Customer 360 product, which has been able to enable a vast range of use cases. And these impact are materialized through obviously revenue improvement, but also cost reduction and through reduction of losses and improved compliance.
Okay, thank you. That's great. So tell us, what is the third characteristic data-driven businesses will demonstrate in 2025?
Sure. So this is where we start to see automation and AI applied to data management. We've seen lots of institutions, especially highly regulated institutions, trying to answer simple questions around what data do I have? Where is it? What is it used for? What condition is it in? Is it being used by individuals or institutions that shouldn't be using it, right? They have to go through massive manual efforts using a variety of different tools and techniques to try to answer those questions. And typically, they can't answer it for all of their data. They're really only able to answer it for a subset of data that is stored in certain environments. And usually by the time they've answered the questions, it's already out of date. So what we expect to see over the next few years is much more innovative approaches using AI, automation, alternative data sets, much more sort of API based architectures and use of connectors, etc., that will allow them to answer those questions in a timely fashion and pervasively across all of their environment, not just for what's in the cloud, but also for what is on their legacy platforms as well. So we're already again seeing early traces of this. We've seen some institutions that are in the healthcare industry clean up reference data sets around their products so that they can optimize how those products are shipped to maximize capacity in their freight and shipping supply channels. We've seen banks clean up dirty data sets related to anti-money laundering, which have been able to allow them to reduce their time frame for clearing up cases from 2 years down to a few months. And we've also seen much more customer-centric businesses clean up their customer data to allow them to proceed with marketing where they otherwise wouldn't have been able to, because the data around, phone numbers and contact information was so messy that they just wouldn't have been able to accurately reach out to customers. And then beyond that, I would say that there will be other innovations that will allow firms to auto-generate metadata, lineage, profile how data moves around the organization so that they can have better answers to questions around how they're generating value with data, where the data is potentially being misused, and give them a view into sort of proliferation of data so that they can actually start to better clean up their environments and reduce cost.
Now, if I put my risk hat, by 2025, automate data management will also further enhance privacy, security, and resilience. When I look at most of the companies today, data security and privacy are often viewed as a compliance issue rather than a required competency. For instance, if we look at granting employee secure data access, it's usually highly manual. Access isn't tailored to individuals or particular data sets. So in the end of the day, data security and privacy protections are often either insufficient or homogeneous, which in the end of the day is useless. Not to mention that the high risk of prolonged data outages that we see companies face that can greatly affect company productivity because of resilience practices or unintended biases that can be added to models that can yield serious problems, be it reputation or business problems. And this is something that is not only going to be driven by regulators, because we see consumers taking a stand on this. They are just beginning to recognize how much of the data is captured and used and voice their opinion on how to be used more fairly.
Thank you. And how might a business start applying these learnings today?
Sure, I can take that first if you like, Elias, and then you can pile on. Look, I think the most important thing is to get started, right? If you haven't already started, get started, but start in a meaningful way. There's no reason to wait. And in fact, the pace at which most firms are moving, if you don't start building out capabilities now, you will be behind by 2025. I would illustrate this through an example of a bank that we've worked with, who a couple of years ago went through an exercise to map out the series of use cases that they were going to build over the following 3 years, and the impact was massive, but the time to build it out still is. It takes time, right? It takes 2 to 3 years to get meaningfully through the journey. That said, you can start to realize impact within months, right? 3 to 6 months. They were already putting points on the board with some of the use cases they were building out early on. But the most important thing I would say to get right and to try to focus on is this concept of reuse. Because any firm can go out and build a multitude of different POCs and use cases with retrofitted data sets for those use cases. By doing that, you will never be able to scale, and you'll never achieve the level of ROI that you should be achieving. So, looking at certain types of domains like customer 360, products and employee 360, etc., and looking at how those data products should be modeled and curated so that they can solve once for many use cases is the type of shift that firms need to go through and actually start to build some new muscle in working across the organization and working collaboratively in this sort of more product-centric way.
For me, there are two big issues here. First, reimagine each workflow, journey, function through the AI lenses. For example, we have worked with a telecom provider to use AI to understand each customer unique needs. This work reduced the time it took to execute a marketing campaign by 75%, by enabling the company through the entire value chain. Reduced churn by almost 5 percentage points, yielding almost $100 million in bottom line. The second thing that for me is critical, and sometimes we forget, is upskill the employees for AI. I'm not saying that everybody has to become a data engineer or a data scientist, but everybody should know the basics, as everybody today uses Excel, Word, PowerPoint. Talent, of course, is a huge challenge for most organizations, although some have been quite creative in developing and retaining their own employees. If we look at the data here for the region, what research shows is that the hiring demand for data engineer and data scientist is quite high. And from past year to this year, some roles have skyrocketed. In some industry. For instance, if I look at financial services, we saw a growth of 51% versus last year. In retail, a similar growth rate of 48%. But the flip side is that the market is reacting. If we look at the supply side, we see that there is an increase in number of people that are devoting their careers to data-related work. We saw a 56% increase in the number of people that declare to work with data engineer, for instance. Therefore, the market is responding, but the transition is not going to be smooth. And each company, especially those that are in the forefront, have to take the lead and work on its own solution.
So I totally agree, Elias. So I would just put a finer point on the importance of embracing talent in this space. It's going to continue to be highly competitive. But as you point out, Elias, the supply and demand will start to equalize. And, I think this is a space where most employees want to learn and have a real appetite to learn and become skilled up in this space. And there's a lot of ways that you can tackle that. There's data academies, there are all kinds of sort of gamification and phishing type techniques that can be used to build awareness and upskill. And if you look at topics like data ethics, you start to realize the importance of having a multidisciplinary and diverse set of profiles that understand data, because the questions like, is this data and the way we're using it ethical, is a legal question, it's a marketing question, it's a finance question, a risk question. It's something that everyone needs to be able to take a view on, and needs to be cognizant of the different profiles of customers and users of the data as well. So I do agree. Talent is a critical aspect of what firms need to focus on in the data and AI space in the next few years.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting, everything that you said about talent. And well, unfortunately, we are heading to the end of our session. Would you like to add anything else, Kayvaun or Elias?
I would just encourage people to read the full report and reach out if they would like to have a deeper discussion on any of the characteristics.
Great, and the report is going to be in our website. Elias, do you want to say anything else, a final message?
A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Elias and Kayvaun, for these insights and for your time today. E muito obrigada também a você que nos acompanha em vídeo ou em podcast. Se você quiser ler o estudo completo sobre a empresa de 2025 orientada por dados e saber mais sobre as dicas para começar o processo, acesse o nosso site www.mckinsey.com.br. Para entrar em contato com os nossos especialistas, nosso e-mail é mckinsey-talks@mckinsey.com. Você também pode enviar perguntas para o nosso próximo episódio. Participe! E a agenda completa do McKinsey Talks está no mckinseytalks.com. Lá você também pode conferir este episódio e também os anteriores em vídeo ou em podcast. É isso aí, muito obrigada e até a próxima!